Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful for You channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Liam Spencer had spent the better part of the morning pacing the cliffside living room of the beach house, watching the ocean crash against the rocks like an echo of every messy decision he'd ever made, every emotional loop he had ever trapped himself in, every vow he had ever broken and every promise he had ever recycled into something resembling change. Even though deep down he knew that change was a performance he wasn't entirely sure he knew how to commit to, and as the sunlight filtered through the windows in long, golden streaks, he kept telling himself that he was different now, calmer, wiser, humbled by health scares and shaken by the stark brush with mortality he'd endured, yet internally, his own subconscious kept whispering the same uncomfortable truth, that he still found himself craving validation, craving the adrenaline of pursuit, craving that dangerous edge between longing and commitment that always left Hope Logan and Steffi Forrester trapped in his orbit. No matter how many times they tried to step away, and the irony of it all, the painful, almost comedic irony, was that the world around him kept insisting that he had evolved, that he had conquered his indecision, that he had learned to value stability over chaos, even while nose-deep in preparations for yet another engagement with Hope, another cycle, another chapter that felt hauntingly familiar, like déjà vu wearing a new tuxedo and a borrowed pair of polished shoes. When Hope arrived that morning accompanied by Beth Spencer, Beth grasping a glitter pen and a somewhat crumpled sheet of paper resembling obligatory wedding inspiration from an astute child intent on directing the adults, Liam forced a practiced smile, one that conveyed calmness, commitment, and an assurance that he would not falter again. Yet, a subtle flicker of tension lingered behind his eyes, for he was acutely aware that online critiques labeled the writer's choices, timing, pacing, and chemistry as blah and uninspired. As a fictional character cognizant of fictional criticism, Liam felt the burden of this judgment deeply, akin to an actor striving to regain the trust of an audience that had lost faith in the authenticity of his narrative arc. However, Beth, blissfully unaffected by adult complexities, entered the living room with resolve, proclaiming that she had a big idea, her words delivered with the gravity of an experienced event planner, and Hope exchanged a wary glance with Liam, for whenever Beth announced a big idea, it typically entailed a speech, a list, a performance, or a mandate that everyone was required to adhere to, without exception. And this time, Beth's big idea wasn't about flowers or dresses or whether Douglas should carry rings or confetti. No, this time, Beth was thinking about the guest list, specifically one person on it, specifically one person she did not want anywhere near her mother's special day, Sheila Sharp, formerly known as Sheila Carter but presently reinvented, at least on paper, as a non-menacing newlywed who promised her best behavior even though nobody believed her, not even her husband, Deacon Sharp, who had spent weeks insisting that Sheila has changed, while knowing darn well that Sheila's level of change typically peaked somewhere between less homicidal and slightly more reflective before doing something drastic again. And so Beth planted her little hands on her little hips and declared, with all the righteous fury of every Forrester, Logan, and Spencer ancestor combined, that Sheila Sharp was not, under any circumstances, invited to the wedding, not allowed to hover, not allowed to lurk, not allowed to breathe in the vicinity of their happiness, and certainly not allowed to bring any of her past chaos into what Beth envisioned as a sparkly, flower-filled, drama-free celebration, and Hope, who had already been secretly hoping Sheila wouldn't attend, blinked in surprise because she hadn't expected Beth to be so decisive, but she appreciated it deeply, nodding as Liam slowly exhaled and glanced toward the door as if half expecting Sheila to materialize out of thin air just to contest the decision. However, the reality was that the Sheila issue was the least of their concerns, for across town, within the opulent, couture-adorned corridors of Forrester Creations, Remy Price was disintegrating, not subtly or quietly, but emotionally unraveling in a manner characteristic of a new, controversial character thrust into the epicenter of scandal at Deke Sharp's welcome party. There, Elector Forrester had publicly confronted him, dismantled him, and made it unequivocally clear that whatever connection they had shared, whatever spark he hoped to revive, whatever tenuous thread he clung to, had been severed the moment he concealed secrets, betrayed trust, and permitted deception to fester long enough to culminate in a spectacular explosion before the entire Forrester inner circle. Remy, still reeling from the verbal confrontation, attempted to apologize, profusely, desperately, and repeatedly, each effort increasingly frantic. However, Electra, with her arms crossed and her expression as frigid as the diamonds on the display table behind her, remained unyielding, unwilling to soften or consider forgiveness. For once, Electra had discovered her voice, her boundaries, and her self-worth, and she was resolute in not allowing a charming troublemaker like Remy to ensnare her in emotional turmoil. Although Remy recognized his mistakes and acknowledged that he had no one to blame but himself, he could not dispel the humiliation of being publicly reprimanded or the sinking dread that Electra was irrevocably finished with him. Thus, defeated, vulnerable, and fearful of losing everyone he valued, he redirected his focus to the one individual he believed might still be receptive, Deke Sharp. Approaching Deke resembled traversing barefoot over shattered glass, as he was engulfed by confusion and blindsided by unforeseen revelations. Remy perceived Deke's uncertainty regarding whether to embrace him, admonish him, or expel him entirely. Nevertheless, Remy implored, his voice trembling, beseeching Deke not to sever their bond, not to obliterate the connection they had cultivated, and not to irrevocably condemn him for secrets he regretted not disclosing sooner. Despite Deke's stoic demeanor, arms crossed and brows knitted, a fleeting expression of sympathy flickered across his face, not forgiveness, nor acceptance, but something more nuanced, something pained, as Deke understood the torment of being judged for past transgressions and the struggle for redemption, having faltered more times than most could recall. As Remy spiraled, Deke struggled, and Electra maintained her unwavering composure. Hope listened to Beth delineate her anti-Sheila edict. Liam, with little enthusiasm, attempted to propose that weddings should unite rather than divide, but Beth promptly interrupted, reminding him that Sheila had previously attempted to shoot her grandmother, kidnapped her great-uncle, faked her own death, and generated sufficient turmoil to fill a 12-episode primetime limited series. Acknowledging Beth's validity, Liam ceased speaking and nodded in acquiescence. As morning transitioned into afternoon, Hope contemplated how to convey her news to Deacon, while Beth enthusiastically devised potential seating arrangements with Sheila's name emphatically crossed out. Liam attempted to mask his internal turmoil regarding the prospect of another engagement so soon. The remnants of past behaviors pervaded the atmosphere, reminding him that others perceived him as stagnant, that detractors asserted his inability to evolve, and that soap opera enthusiasts on social media expressed fatigue with the repetitive Liam-Hope-Steffi dynamic that had persisted for over a decade. However, Hope, observing his distant demeanor, gently squeezed his hand and whispered their intention to rewrite their narrative, reclaim their story, and prove their critics wrong, if he desired that as fervently as she did. At Forrester, Electra expressed her frustrations to Ivy Forrester, asserting her definitive decision to sever ties with Remy, with no possibility of reconciliation. Ivy, however, raised an eyebrow and subtly proposed that anger does not necessarily equate to finality. Electra, dismissing this notion, reiterated her unwavering resolve to be completely finished with Remy. Ivy, experienced in the complexities of Forrester breakups, quietly sipped her iced latte, allowing time and emotions to unfold naturally. Meanwhile, Sheila Sharp halted her consumption of a cupcake at Il Giardino, acutely aware that someone, somewhere, was marginalizing her. Deacon, seated opposite her, blinked anxiously, fully cognizant that the wedding invitation dilemma was on the verge of erupting, and he feared the emotional tempest his wife could unleash whenever there was an insinuation of her unwelcomeness. But as the sun began to set, as the final orange glow washed over Los Angeles, as Beth finished her announcement and skipped off happily, as Hope prepared to call her father, as Liam stared at the engagement ring he had once again placed on Hope's finger, the truth finally settled in the room like a soft but undeniable weight. Liam Spencer hadn't changed, not fully, not fundamentally, not deeply enough to break the pattern that defined him, and whether that meant heartbreak or growth, triumph or disaster, renewal or familiar repetition, remained to be seen, because in Los Angeles, on the bold and the beautiful, love was relentless, family was unforgiving, secrets were destructive, redemption was fragile, weddings were never just weddings, forgiveness was optional, Sheila was never done causing chaos, Electra's decision would inevitably crack, Remy's desperation would only increase, and Liam Spencer, conflicted, charming, infuriating, inconsistent, and eternally searching for himself, would once again find himself at the center of a storm he both feared and craved, a storm that would shape the future of Hope, Beth, Deacon, Sheila, Electra, Remy, and the entire Forrester Logan Spencer universe in ways no one could fully control or predict. And while the sun disappeared fully behind the horizon, turning the waves outside the beach house into sheets of dark, shimmering steel, Liam found himself unable to shake the gnawing sensation that everything around him was moving too fast. Again, Hope's optimism, Beth's boldness, the wedding planning, the pressure to appear changed, steady, mature, and Hope, sensing the shift in him, gently asked if he was okay, prompting Liam to nod with a soft reassurance that felt like a costume he was slipping into for the 100th time, even as his chest tightened with the familiar fear that he was about to disappoint everyone all over again. But before Hope could press further, Beth ran back into the room clutching a second list, this one labeled Rules for Sheila, with subpoints that ranged from no glaring to no screaming to no ruining mommy's makeup, only for Hope to gently remind Beth that Sheila wouldn't be at the wedding at all, which delighted Beth enough for her to announce she was going to call her grandmother Brooke and tell her the good news because Grandma Brooke hates Sheila even more than I do. Meanwhile, across the city, in the neon-lit parking lot behind Il Giardino, Sheila Sharp stood frozen beside Deacon's car, staring at him with wide, wounded eyes as he tried to gently, but awkwardly, explain that there was a chance Hope and Liam might prefer to keep the ceremony small, intimate, uncomplicated, which was Deacon speak for Beth Bandu before Hope even got a vote, and I'm trying to. And Steffi navigating the churning waters of grief, rage, and loyalty, all while Hope and Liam coordinated with law enforcement, lawyers, and medical authorities in a desperate bid to protect Luna from further harm, to understand the miscarriage, and to hold Grace accountable, yet Grace, always several steps ahead, used the very chaos surrounding her to consolidate her narrative, presenting herself publicly as a compassionate mother who had acted in the best interests of Luna, whose delicate health had necessitated a compassionate release, masking her orchestration with the kind of precise, cold calculation that only she could wield, and as word leaked through the grapevine to other key figures, from Deacon Sharp, who expressed disbelief and concern, to Bill's network of informants, and even distant family members like Papi Nozawa, whose cryptic reactions suggested a hidden agenda, the intrigue multiplied exponentially, with every whispered comment, every sympathetic gesture, and every attempted intervention potentially part of a larger, unseen strategy, while the hospital itself remained a crucible of tension, with Finn revisiting every decision made during Luna's care, Bridget Forrester consulting on medical records and protocols, Taylor Hayes providing emotional support to both Finn and Steffi, and even minor staff members caught between loyalty, fear, and professional ethics. And outside, the media began to catch wind of the bizarre circumstances, with tabloids speculating wildly about a miscarriage, an escape, and the moral culpability of Grace Buckingham, generating waves of gossip that seeped into the Spencer and Logan households, prompting Hope to confront Bill with a mixture of anger and fear, Liam to press Finn for answers, and Steffi to oscillate between despair and determination, while Grace, confident in the perfection of her plan, continued to manipulate appearances, influencing social media narratives, managing hospital PR, and even quietly coaching Luna on how to present her story to the few people she could trust, reinforcing the narrative that her release was mandated by fragile health conditions, all while ensuring that law enforcement's attention was deflected, subtly turning suspicion toward medical anomalies rather than deliberate interference. And even as the months passed, the repercussions of the miscarriage and the escape continued to reverberate, with fractured relationships, bitter arguments, and clandestine alliances forming and dissolving across Los Angeles, Finn wrestling nightly with guilt and the impossibility of knowing the full extent of Grace's manipulations, Steffi alternating between protecting Luna and challenging Grace's morality, Hope and Liam coordinating with attorneys and private investigators to track Luna and understand the legal implications of her release, Brooke lobbying Ridge and other key figures for accountability, Bill determined to uncover every hidden detail, and even minor characters caught in the social orbit, journalists, hospital staff, family friends, and colleagues, beginning to take sides, spread rumors, and speculate on the ethical quagmire Grace had created, while Luna herself, navigating her newfound freedom, began to question her dependence on Grace, reflecting on every decision soften the blow, but Sheila immediately went pale, her breath catching in her throat as she whispered that she could feel it. She knew someone was pushing her out again, shutting her out, excluding her, just like they always had, and that maybe she shouldn't have believed she could ever stop paying for her past, no matter how many apologies she made or how consistent her behavior had been lately. And Deacon, panicking at the tremble in her voice, tried to reassure her, tried to say the right words, tried to insist that this didn't define their future, but Sheila abruptly turned away, eyes shimmering like storm clouds, muttering that she had been foolish to think she would be welcomed, foolish to trust that Hope could ever forgive her, foolish to imagine that she could attend a family celebration without someone dragging her name through the mud, and Deacon silently cursed himself because he knew this reaction, this sharp, hurt, volatile unraveling, was exactly what everyone feared. While Sheila's emotions were tumultuous, a different emotional upheaval was occurring at Forrester Creations, where Electra Forrester had sequestered herself in the design office, forcefully slamming drawers and dramatically discarding sketches. Ivy attempted to console her, gently suggesting that anger is transient and emotions tend to return to their sources. However, Electra dismissed any notion that Remy could eventually regain her trust, vociferously proclaiming her disillusionment with liars, emotional manipulators, and men harboring perilous secrets. Yet, as she articulated her sentiments, her voice faltered slightly, revealing a hint of vulnerability beneath her fierce demeanor, which Ivy noticed, offering a sympathetic glance that only intensified Electra's defensiveness. In the hallway, Remy leaned against the wall, head bowed, absorbing every word as if each syllable were a physical blow, yearning to enter the office and articulate his perspective once more. However, he recognized that Electra had reached her emotional threshold, and a single misstep could trigger a catastrophic reaction akin to a Forrester-level explosion, one that even Ridge would avoid. Consequently, Remy wiped his eyes, composed himself, and resolved that only Deke might comprehend the magnitude of his loss. He returned to Il Giardino just in time to witness Sheila storming back inside, her gaze imbued with a perilous intensity, a look that compelled Remy to pause, aware that the emotional turmoil within her was on the verge of eruption. Upon seeing him, Sheila perceived yet another individual linked to Deke's stress, another source of turmoil infiltrating their lives. She erupted, reproaching him for undermining the family and introducing drama into Deke's existence, which Deke had endeavored to restore. Remy, already vulnerable and desperate, retorted that Sheila had no authority to admonish him about drama, given her status as the epitome of catastrophe. Within moments, they exchanged sharp insults until Deacon intervened, demanding tranquility, only to discover with dismay that half the restaurant staff had ceased their activities to observe. Amidst the public turmoil, Liam, at the beach house, finally confided in Hope, expressing his fear, not of marrying her or being with her, but of failing and disappointing her once more, of perpetuating the cycle that fans and critics asserted he could never transcend. Hope, moved by his candor, tenderly cupped his face and reminded him that awareness signifies change, that self-reflection fosters growth, and that he need not prove anything immediately, he merely needed to be present, consistently, and allow their love to develop. But even as she spoke, even as her eyes softened, even as Beth hummed in the other room while drawing a seating chart that prominently featured a glittery "No Sheila zone," Liam couldn't shake the sense that forces beyond their control, Sheila's resentment, Electra's anger, Remy's desperation, Deke's turmoil, were all moving toward a collision, an inevitable crash that would pull them all into a new storm of conflict just as they were trying to build something stable, something peaceful, something secure. And Hope felt it too, that subtle shift in the air, that premonition of unrest, that intuition that weddings in their world never unfolded without a scandal, a twist, or a dangerous interruption. Just as across town, Sheila stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of Il Giardino, gripping the sink with trembling hands, whispering to herself that she wouldn't be treated like a monster forever, that she had changed, that she deserved love, respect, a place at the table, and that she would not let anyone, not even a child, erase her again.